There should be the button at the bottom, Cash.
Yeah, when you're screen sharing, it like switches, so it's at the top. Okay, so applying to grad school, the first question that you need to ask yourself is, where am I going to apply? There's actually 677 mass graduate programs in the United States, according to AMS. So narrowing that down, because you don't have the time probably or the money to apply to all of those programs. So you need to figure out where to apply, and a lot of different things will factor into that decision. So first off, we have like the academic reasons, right? So specific areas of interest. Are you interested in doing pure math? Are you interested in doing applied math? Maybe you're interested in math bio. And what does the program at these specific places look like? Is there a specific person that you want to work with? And we can talk about that later when we talk about some of the application material. Are there interesting courses or qualifying exams offered there? One of the draws of North Carolina State University that we'll talk about later is that we have more qualifying exams than I've ever seen anywhere. So that's kind of cool. You also have to ask yourself what you want to do after graduation. So do you want to be in academia? Do you want to work at a national lab or in government or in industry somewhere? And what do the alumni from that university do traditionally? So I don't know whether that's necessarily public information. Maybe on LinkedIn, you can see if somebody got their PhD from somewhere, but you might need to ask somebody from the department what that looks like. And often departments have what graduates are doing now also posted on their website. Are there other departments that you can collaborate with? So maybe you have more of an interdisciplinary approach. Maybe you want to do some math physics type things, maybe some more math bio things with actual biologists. So that could be important. Often the best source of information comes from your academic advisors or your professors about where you should apply, because there's people they know there, or they know that it's a good program. And an important question to ask is, can you get in? So often when you apply to undergrad, you have these same kind of questions, right? Can you get into these schools? You often organize them into a safe category, a competitive category, and maybe a reach category, right? For grad school, sometimes it's hard to know like where they rank with each other. You can use the US News and World Report. They give like a ranking every year. It might not be so important for like seeing who's 25th and 26th and see, you know, that one's so much better than the 26th one or something, but it'll give you a general idea of how competitive applying to those programs will be. AMS also has a school ranking, although I think it's quite old now, but they divided into tiers of schools. I think they did that in 2011 though. But there's also, I mean, there's a lot of information online outside of these things. There also may be personal reasons that factor into your decision about where to apply and potentially go to graduate school. So where do you want to live? Maybe if you don't want to live in Arizona in the desert or something, you don't apply there, right? Maybe you have a significant other, or you want to be close to family and friends. I know personally, I was married when I applied to graduate school, so my partner had a list of places that she would agree to live in, and I had a list of schools that I thought were really interesting, and it happened that North Carolina happened to be on both of the lists. So do you want to live in a city or a suburb, or would you prefer more of a rural environment? These can factor into your decision. Also, cost of living. So this is something that people don't often think about when they're applying to graduate school. And that's like, how are you going to survive there? So often when you go to a PhD program, you get some kind of stipend, usually for teaching or doing research. And how does that stipend relate to cost of living in specific places? So for example, the University of Nebraska, where I did my undergrad, has a pretty low stipend compared to everywhere else that I applied. But the cost of living in Nebraska is almost nothing. They almost pay you to live there. So also, some schools require the graduate students to pay fees, like North Carolina State. So for example, at North Carolina State, the standard 9-month TA stipend is about $19,000, and every semester we have to pay just under $1,300. Now, some schools don't, and some schools do. So you have to think about that when you factor this in. Again, maybe not a huge issue. If you're looking to make a lot of money, you're probably not going to want to go to grad school, at least for the next 5 years. And then, has the department had funding issues in the past? I don't know how public some of that information is, but that could be a good question to ask if you apply and you get there and talk to graduate students and things. Also, something that's not on this list is like summer funding. So often TAs are funded through the 9-month school year. And then there's other summer teaching jobs that are on top of that. So NCSU has a lot of different summer teaching activities that our grad students do. Another important personal reason would be work-life balance. So this is actually pretty important for, like, depending on what kind of person you are. Do you thrive in a supportive environment, or do you thrive in a more competitive environment? And graduate schools can be very different in that sense. I found that NCSU is very supportive, but I know that some of the places that I have friends at are more of a competitive environment. So, and then what are the workload expectations? What does it mean to be a TA at North Carolina State? We get to teach our own classes if you want to. But it doesn't feel like I'm overwhelmed ever formally, but some places might give you a ton of grading or something. So, and then the last bullet point here says, talk to current graduate students at that school. So this can be hit or miss. For example, I imagine if you emailed any of us, which our contact information is on our website, we would gladly tell you anything you want to know about North Carolina State's math department. But if you just click a random person, they might not email you back. And it's not because they, like, their life sucks and they hate you, they just might be really busy. So for example, Katie's last name starts with an A, so she gets a lot of emails from people asking if about our department. She's at the top of the list. So now we'll kind of talk about what we need for applications. In general, these are the kind of main things that you need, and we'll talk about each one individually. So you usually need a personal statement, a CV, recommendation letters is super important, a transcript. Sometimes you need GRE scores. This year's a little weird. You need money, and you need to kind of organize your due dates and things. So first, we'll talk about the personal statement. Why do you want to go to this grad school? So I think the personal statement is probably the hardest part of a grad school application. You need to, first and foremost, you need to personalize your personal statement to that graduate school. And it's a lot more work, but I think that it means a lot more to each of the graduate schools that you actually personalize and don't just have a cookie cutter personal statement sent to all of these grad schools. And you're kind of selling yourself to the grad school. So why are you a good candidate for their program? Have you done a bunch of REUs and had a lot of success? Have you done senior research projects? Have you gotten to take graduate courses at your school and have already shown success there, right? Other extracurriculars, things like that, conferences, teaching experience, things like that. So you can talk about stories regarding like personal development, especially if they relate to math. Talk about role models, but we really want to stick to the facts in this personal statement. So this kind of childhood memories or blue sky philosophy isn't necessarily going to help you in your application, and it might just take up room in what's very important space in a personal statement. Also, it could be important to name drop people you know or want to work with at these institutions. So I know when I applied to grad school, I looked at every grad school and found a person whose research I thought was cool. The person I wrote about when I got into NC State isn't who I'm working with now, but it shows that you've done a little bit of research and you know that there's at least something interesting at that place, right? Especially if, for instance, you've done work with somebody at an institution, that's pretty cool, and that will probably increase your chances. And this is the best place to address holes in your application and on your CV especially. So why do you not have any graduate coursework? Maybe depending on where you're from here, maybe your school doesn't have graduate courses. Or why did you take a gap year? Or what were you doing between your graduation and when you're applying right now? So for example, were you going to law school, or were you teaching, or something like that, right? And maybe you can talk about why you have bad grades in certain courses, or something was happening. Like maybe you failed calculus and then now you're a really good applicant for grad school, but that's a weird kind of thing on your CV. And the most important thing about the personal statement is proofread, proofread, proofread. So get it to anyone that will provide feedback. Often your letter writers, which Ben will talk about here in a second. And if your application's a toss-up, like one typo can make the difference. So NCSU has an undergraduate writing center, which advertises that they'd love to look at your personal statements and application materials. But really, your letter writers, your advisors, your professors, make people tired of hearing from you so that they can read your stuff. Yeah, let's see. So CV and resume. So most schools will ask for a CV or a resume. If you don't know, a CV is a curriculum vitae, if that's how you say it, I guess. And it's just kind of an academic resume. So it has your education on it, it has your research experience and your higher course level, has your teaching experience, all of your extracurriculars. Important things that I believe Dr. Ibsen told us last year. It's generally a maximum of 2 pages on these applications, but you want everything that's important on the first page. So everything that they're going to see at the beginning, everything that you want them to see, make sure it's on the first page. So for example, REUs and publications, if you have those, internships and relevant job experience, awards, right? And that's not to say that anything on your CV is not important. For example, knowing Python might be very important, but having a publication is probably more important to your application. Also, there's people, for instance, the Writing Center can help you with that. There's people at all of your universities, I'm sure, that will help you with that. So now I turn it over to Dan.
Okay, so I'm gonna finish off the materials. Okay, so the next kind of important thing that you'll almost certainly have for your grad school recommendation is a letter, or a grad school application is a letter of recommendation. So ideally you want to ask professors that you know pretty well, like not someone who you took like one time for an intro calculus course, but someone who you maybe took for several higher level math classes, maybe someone you did a research project with. It can be really great if you did like an REU at another university or have a connection to another university. You can get a faculty member at a different university than your home institution to write a letter. That can be like fantastic. And I'm sure the faculty can speak to this more later, but you want them to write about like your communication skills or your research potential, things like that. And you should definitely at every step in the process be very organized. So you should ideally make a spreadsheet of all the schools you're going to apply to with the deadlines for the letters for each one, and then like send that to them, remind them and ask them well in advance of when the due date, of whenever the due date is, like at least a month, maybe more. More is probably always better. So that's letters of recommendation. So next, Cash. So transcripts. So yeah, most schools when you apply, they'll just have you upload an unofficial transcript. That you're gonna make sure it has all of the credit. So if you had like community college credit or credit from study abroad, you make sure that's on there. And then later, once you're accepted, they'll ask for an official transcript. So you'll probably have to pay some amount of money. Usually not so bad compared to the amount that you pay in like the other fees. But some amount of money. It can take a while, especially if it has to be mailed, especially with the current state of the post office. So maybe that's something to watch out for. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. And then next is the GRE. So typically you'll have to take the GRE. It can be taken anytime, the general GRE. There's 2 main sections, the verbal and the quantitative. There's also a writing section, but generally I think people emphasize your verbal and quantitative scores more. So some schools will have their like average or minimum scores listed. So if you go to NC State's website right now, they have like the average scores of our recent applicants listed. And then you can take it multiple times and decide which score to send. So maybe don't automatically send your scores if you don't like them. You also see your score immediately. So usually you take this on a computer and you'll get your score back like right away. So you can kind of see how you did immediately. But then also with COVID, you know, some schools are not requiring it anymore. So that might be a thing to look out for, is like, what is their COVID specific policy? Now there's also the subject test, like the math subject GRE, which some schools require, others recommend, others don't care at all. So you should figure out whichever the schools you're applying, like which ones really require it and which ones don't. Also, you know, if you score badly or you don't like your score and you're applying to a school that doesn't require it, you know, you don't have to send it. So that might be something to consider. There's also there's not as many test dates for this. So there's not like, with the general GRE, there's like constantly like rolling test dates. But for this, there's only like 3. We listed them here, but then you can also check out the GRE website, or I'm sure if you just Google like math subject GRE. So you should figure out, you know, when you're going to take it, things like that. But yeah, and once again, though, with COVID, there might be more schools that aren't requiring it. And now, so all of these things cost. So the GRE is quite expensive. It's like $200. The subject test is another $150, and it's $27 per school. So there's that's a lot of cost already. And then you also have application costs for each school that you apply to. So I think NC State's is around 75, right? And then some schools can be up to 100. And so I only applied to one school, but Cash was telling me that people apply on average like 5 to 10. So that can be another big cost. Now, maybe Seth can talk about this later, but there's some ways that you can, sometimes you can get fees waived for applications. But yeah, it can be quite expensive. And then due dates. So this is probably like the most important thing. You should know all of the due dates. Make a spreadsheet. As I said, send it to your letter writers. Make sure they know when all of their letters are due. And then, you know, I think a lot of the due dates we were looking at earlier this morning were in like early to late January, sometime in January or maybe early February. So yeah, make sure you know the due dates. Make sure you know when's coming up. Things are coming up. And then as also this last bullet says, there's a difference between like when you need to hit submit and then when some of the like physical materials need to arrive. So know the difference between them. But I think in general, earlier is always better. And then lastly, so there's some additional materials. So you might be asked to write like a cover letter. You also might be asked to make a list of all of your courses so they can assess like how rigorous your courses were, I suppose. So you might need like title of the course, the book that was used, the description of the material covered, and things like that. So, and yeah, lastly, make sure you keep organized, have a spreadsheet, know when everything is due, make sure your letter writers know. It's probably the most important.
Okay, so that is all that we have for our presentation. And now we will open it up to questions from the chat and things like that. You can raise your hand, but first we'll allow our panelists to introduce themselves. I guess on my screen, Ilse is first. So Ilse, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ilse Ibsen. I'm not quite sure what to say here. So my research areas are numerical linear algebra, probabilistic numerics, randomized algorithms, statistical analysis of errors. I received a PhD in computer science, actually. And I've been here at NC State since '93. And I think it's the second best decision I've ever made is to come to NC State. First best decision I ever made is to come to this country in spite of all its problems. So I'm really happy at NC State because there are a lot of good collaborations because we have a large department, but also outside the department with engineering, with physics, data science, statistics. So yeah, that's it.
And Ilse's been on several admissions committees, is that right? Like graduate
recently just one.
Okay.
But last millennium, I don't know. That was...
and we have Mansoor.
Hi, I'm Mansoor Haider, professor in the math department at NC State for a bit over 20 years. I'm also associate director at SAMSI, which is one of the NSF math institutes. My research is in math biology, specializing in biological soft tissues mostly. I was the graduate director of math and applied math for 4 years in the past decade at NC State, so experience there. Yeah, look forward to your questions.
And then Kevin Flores.
I'm Kevin. I also do math biology. I've been a professor in the department for about 5 years. And I've served on the math biology graduate committee. So we review applications of the biomath PhD program for all of that time, for the last 5 years or so. Yeah, I've really enjoyed my time here at NC State. It's a very interdisciplinary department between, math, applied math, and other disciplines in the school, which I think is a highlight of our department and our university in particular. Yeah, so happy to answer any questions.
And lastly, Seth.
Hey, I'm Seth Sullivan. I'm the current grad director in math and applied math. I'm a professor. Let's see, what else was I supposed to say? My interests are applications of algebra to statistics and biology. I guess I'm kind of the only like pure math faculty here at this group, sort of. I mean, I don't know how to describe myself exactly, but I can be the pure math. I can answer pure mathy type questions. And yeah, I've been on the admissions committee for like 5 years or something, or maybe it hasn't been that long. It just seems like it's been that long. I don't know, but can answer lots of questions about what makes a good application and stuff like that.
Thank you, guys. Okay, I'm Katie, and I'm going to kind of just go through the questions that I received in the chat, both privately and to everyone, and just address them to the panelists. I think this first one is a good one for Seth. And the question is, if you want to apply to a pure math PhD program, what classes should you be taking as an undergrad?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think you want to make sure you have those core pure mathy courses. So in addition to the analysis course, you want, abstract algebra and, proof-based linear algebra. So if you're an NC State student, we're talking about 405 and 407. I think getting a breadth of courses is also really good, because if you just narrowly focus on one or two things at this point, you're not seeing all of mathematics, which is a pretty broad field. So trying to spread out and take courses from a variety of things: combinatorics, topology, computer algebra. I mean, those are kind of our specialties in our department. Probability, but just kind of spreading yourself out and seeing lots of different things is definitely helpful. And then trying to get into graduate courses if you can. That all those things help your application, and also help you to think about whether or not your graduate school might be right for you, just in terms of how you do in those graduate level courses. That's on the core. Yeah, so that was just the course side. I mean, there's also, non-course stuff would be like trying to do some research. If there's an opportunity to do some kind of TAing in math, that could help your application. Doing an REU. Yeah, all those things are going to be helpful.
Great. Then there's another question, this might be for some of the grad students, is when you're looking for a research advisor, what kind of things should you look for when choosing one? So Cash, I know that you're kind of far into your research a little bit. Do you want to talk about that?
Cash and Ben are both my students, so should I like mute my, like turn off my sound so I can't hear what they say about how to choose an advisor?
I think often what people do is when you're taking your qualifying exam courses, if you really like the subject and like the person, you ask them if they are taking students. That's not exactly what I did. I kind of just walked into Seth's office one day and said, I think your stuff is cool. And he said, cool, then read this other stuff. And that's kind of how it started. It kind of varies. Everyone has kind of a different story. Definitely, like, it's maybe not super important, especially first semester, your first year, to find a research advisor, I don't think. But whatever your courses, whatever you think you're like in your courses, maybe look at faculty that do that kind of stuff. I don't know. Does anybody else have any comments?
Something that I heard a lot and something that I found really valuable was taking a class with the professor that I wanted to work with. So like I took a class with Dr. Stitchinger before I worked with him. It was not at all related to what I'm now doing. But I like taking a class first because they always say is take the class and then go to office hours and kind of see what they're like and see if you kind of think the same and if they're going to provide like the kind of help that you want. Because you want to make sure you have like the type of working relationship that's going to work for you. And that they can explain things in a way that makes sense to you. So I think that's something that's valuable, is just trying to get to know the professor beforehand, just to avoid issues if possible.
I agree with what Lindsay's saying. I also think it's important to decide like what kind of relationship you want. Do you want a more hands-on or a more hands-off approach? Do you need a little bit of guidance, or do you feel like you can do things on your own? So that's something important to look for too.
May I also say something? I think it's important to be open-minded. I remember when I was an undergraduate student, the topic I hated the most was numerical analysis. It was just absolutely boring, unwieldy, and awful. And then I went to graduate school and we had to take a required course in that. And then all of a sudden, oh, it was interesting. And my advisor who turned out to be my advisor, presented it really well. And now I did a PhD in it. So I think being open-minded is important. And also that was mentioned already, the personal connection to the advisor is important. You know, is the advisor I think what Katie just mentioned is the advisor on the same page as you. So.
Maybe I'll add a little bit more here too. Yeah, it is really a process to pick an advisor. And most people don't go in knowing who they're working with, unless some funding is being offered to you, like an RA or something, then you might have to decide. So it was mentioned, I think Lindsay mentioned about going to office hours, but another thing that's very common is if you are interested in possibly working with someone, you could meet with them and ask to start reading some papers, or just start meeting with them to discuss certain aspects of their research. And then, so that's very common with the students who work with me. And then after like 6 to 8 weeks, or maybe a little bit longer, you really have a good sense of whether it's a good fit.
Great. So the next question is, do you recommend reaching out to people from a specific department before applying? And so I'm not sure if this is talking about grad students in the program or professors in the program, but if anyone wants to comment on that, maybe one of the professors here, do you think that it's appropriate for students to reach out to you before they decide whether or not to apply to the program?
So I'll say I just had a call with someone like a couple days ago like that. And they're from an institution where, I know someone. So if they say Professor X recommended that I reach out to you, that sometimes helps. Not that I wouldn't have talked to them otherwise, but, people have different levels of busyness and how receptive they are. But if you ask one of your advisor or one of the people writing your letters for who are people they might put you in touch with, I think that helps a bit in actually making it happen. But I would recommend it.
Thank you. And then we have a question from a non-math major. If you're not majoring in math and you want to apply for a master's or a PhD in math, what are some other methods of preparation that you recommend, aside from taking those required courses that Seth, you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I would just recommend, making sure to go beyond the required courses. So you have a little more breadth than just those kind of 4. Like in our application to NC State, we say you should have 2 semesters of analysis, abstract algebra, and linear algebra, but there's just so much more, you know, to math than that, and it's really going to help you succeed when you get into those graduate courses the first time if you've seen a bit more than that, I think. So I think, I mean, honestly, that's one thing that can definitely help, is to just getting a little bit more course prep.
Okay, and then Cash had mentioned earlier about, say, if you had a low grade in a class, kind of explaining that away in part of your application. What if you have some sort of, maybe a low GPA or something else that doesn't look so great on your application? Do your letter writers say anything about that in your recommendation letters? And if so, how do you go about that?
Yeah, you can definitely ask your letter writers to talk about that. I mean, I think, you know, we always try to look at the whole file. I mean, if we see right at the beginning GPA is 2.8, then it might be a pretty fast look, but we're going to look at the transcript and everything and the letters to see, you know, what's there. One thing that's cool about the NC State, and maybe other schools do this too, but there's actually like a text box when you're filling out the application where you can specifically talk about other extenuating circumstances that might have affected your, you know, your application in some way. So I see all kinds of things in there, like, you know, some just interesting stories sometimes go in that text box, and they don't go necessarily in the personal statement, but it can be enlightening about, you know, the background of the student.
Thank you. Dr. Flores, could you talk about maybe what's different between applying to a math program and a math bio program, and what some differences in the application process are?
Sure, yeah. Maybe I'll answer this. Also, I saw there's a student who had in the chat a question about having multiple advisors like in other departments as well. Yeah, so I think the main difference is probably the emphasis in biology. Usually when people apply to the math bio program, they have a specific biological area. So it's not only important like what the math biology professors that they might want to work with do, but who else like in biology is at the school, or in chemical engineering, or in the vet school. So yeah, they want to like sort of consider the entire school in their application, because the collaborators are usually going to be there. It's not always the case. Like I have collaborators like at Duke or whatever. You know, so you'd have to like reach out and see where your potential advisors, biological collaborators are. But yeah, I guess just, I think the main difference is that specific emphasis on a particular biological area. And then obviously you're not going to be able to cover, you know, so much material in pure math and biology at the same time, although maybe Seth seems to be able to do it, but you know what I mean? Like, so you can't possibly cover so much territory. So there's a little bit less of an expectation to have, I guess, a strength in pure math, and more of an emphasis on like, how are the mathematical tools that you're using being used towards a specific application, and how does your interest sort of integrate into all that, I guess, if that makes sense. So, you know, if I were, you know, applying to be like Mansour's student, maybe I would do more numerical methods or something like that, because he's interested in biomechanics. And, you know, same thing with Sharon, I would probably be more interested in PDEs. And so I would have like these specific areas of emphasis in addition to the biological area that I'm interested in. Sorry, Mansour, I didn't want to speak for you, but.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I just want to add on that too, that everything Kevin said is, I think, spot on. And I just add that another thing we look for in math biology is your willingness to go out and read the biological literature. In my case, it's more like bioengineering, biomechanics, but students do really, really well when they can go out and read the journals in the other discipline and digest the information. And so in the past, there have been occasions where there's trainees who maybe want to work with you and they're interested more in the methods, but they really don't like that idea of reading, diving into the application. And sometimes that's not a good fit. So if you think you're interested in math biology, you also have to think carefully about how interested you are in biology. You don't need to necessarily know it coming in, but you do need a willingness and an interest to be able to read things in the journals from that field that relate to the math.
Following up on Kevin started answering the question on multiple advisors, I think at NC State it's quite easy and common. So one of my PhD students is actually in statistics now. A previous PhD student was co-advised by an advisor in physics. Another one of my PhD student is committee members are from the United Kingdom in statistics. So interdisciplinary collaboration with multiple advisors here at NC State, even across colleges, is, from my perspective, usually not a problem.
Thank you. So we had a question about, one, is it okay if you don't know what you want to do when you're applying to grad school? And then two, once you're in grad school, can you switch what you want to do? And so I'm going to answer that first. And I'm going to say that while I had a pretty non-traditional path to grad school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I took 6 years off between undergrad and grad school and really didn't know. So I took kind of a slew of classes my first year and then decided what I was interested in and readjusted for year two. So I think it's okay that you don't know what you want to do just yet. But does anyone else want to add anything to that?
Yes, I think math, I agree with you topic-wise. I don't think if you don't know what you want to do math topic-wise, I think that's fine. And when I talk to people in industry and ask them what should we teach, they say, oh, just anything. Just make sure they know teamwork and communication. However, I think what you should know is what you want to do after you graduate. Do you want to go to a teaching university? Do you want to go to industry, to a national lab, or to a competitive academic place? I think that you should know right away, because if you want to go to a teaching place, then you should say have a few publications that are teaching related. If you want to go to industry, I think you should really work on your software development skills. So that is something I think you should figure out really, really fast. But math topic-wise, I think you should do what you want and what strikes your fancy.
Yeah, I would just second what Ilse said. I mean, math is a field that's both very broad, and to get to the research, you have to go deep as well. It's pretty uncommon that as an undergraduate student, you have done stuff in your coursework that's even brushing up against what the active research areas are. So, I mean, I think we take it, and we, in all the applications, students say, I'm interested in topology, I'm interested in numerical analysis and blah, blah, blah. And then once they get here, they're doing something totally different. And we expect that, and that's totally normal.
I can say that that's definitely what happened for me. When I started, I thought that I wanted to do just representation theory and very pure algebra. And then I took algebra with Seth, and at the end of the semester, he was like, oh, I'm looking for 2 graduate students to do a research project over the summer. And I really liked him and his class. And so I just started working with him. So I think it's really easy. Just go in a different direction or whatever kind of presents itself.
Okay. And then there's a question here. Do professors ever say no to writing letters of recommendation for you?
Yes. If I can't write a good letter, or if I've had a student in a class zillions of years ago, if I cannot write a good letter, usually I say no. And I explain why.
So it happens a lot that I have an academic advisee who needs a third, they have people for 2 of their 3 letters, but they don't have a person for the 3rd letter. And I say, look, it'd be better if it's someone who knows you well, who you did research with, or a project in a class, or something beyond just taking tests and doing homework. But if you don't have anyone, then I can write a letter, because I've been following your progress as your academic advisor. And then I guess I also have the experience with running a grad program, et cetera. So it is quite common that people maybe don't have someone for their 3rd letter. So try your academic advisor. think of if you had your academic advisor for at least like 2 or 3 semesters, that might be a person to go to as well if you don't have 3 people. Also, because it wasn't on the slides, it is very common if you've done an internship to have a recommendation letter from your supervisor there. It doesn't have to be a professor.
The thing is with the interpretation of the letters, people read between the lines. They don't only look at what is being said, but also what is not being said. So if I can't say a lot because, you know, there wasn't much class participation in some of the math classes. So if I don't say a lot, that could be interpreted as, oh, she doesn't really want to say all these things and then, you know, some back of the envelope or whatever interpretation takes place. So that's another thing, the reading between the lines, one has to be careful about.
I just wanted to add to that. I mean, if you guys are at this meeting, you're already thinking ahead about letters, hopefully. So you should be sort of making connections with professors early on, you know, junior year, probably at the latest, to try to sort of lay the groundwork for maybe getting a recommendation letter later, you know, developing that relationship early on.
Okay, we have kind of a 2-part question here. Back to the course requirements. We talked about kind of the course requirements for undergrads in pure math. 1, what are the classes that you should be taking for applied math or biomath? And 2, how do you handle classes that you've audited that don't show up as a grade? They're on your transcript as audited. How do you tell them that you understood the material well, but you didn't get a grade for it?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question? You were cutting out on my end.
Sure. The question was, we talked about the classes for pure math that students should take. What about classes for biomath and applied math that they should definitely have under their belt before applying to grad school?
I'll just throw out some info first. I mean, beyond like the Diffie, you actually want to have the Diffie-Q class that comes after Calc 3, I guess. You want to have linear algebra. Beyond that, you want to have probably at least 2 to 5 or more things, depending on the size of your university, that are computational math or maybe like partial differential equations. Maybe modeling, if there's a modeling type of class or a methods class. Maybe some stuff outside of math that is related to theory or models or computation. They all look good, but that said, I mean, it's different at every institution, what that mix might be. We do get a lot of first-year grad students in applied math who have not had PDEs before. So our modeling sequence is sort of designed, not assuming that they've had PDEs, and that's perfectly fine. And Kevin and Ilsa can add to this as well.
Sure, yeah, I'll just add for the biomath applicants. You do want to see some biological interest in a specific area. This doesn't necessarily need to take the form of taking a class as an undergrad. It could be doing an internship in a biological lab, for example. That's a good way to get a recommendation letter. It could also be just like reading papers in a particular area that have interest to you, and that's something that maybe comes through in your personal statement. Also, a lot of people do REUs, and through those REUs, they learn, you know, some biological areas that they want to emphasize in their application. But again, that doesn't necessarily come through in the transcript. So you want to be picking up like different, you know, ways to sort of show that you're biologically motivated in some specific area. It doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be a class. In terms of math classes, you do want to see people who do have like a strong record in analysis and linear algebra as well, just because the first year or 2 of the biomath courses are, they're pretty stringent, I would say. You know, biomath 1, you should know some analysis is definitely going to help you there. Biomath 2, stochastic processes, some statistics courses would probably help you there. And 3 and 4, I think, are having to do with PDs. So that, you know, some basic undergraduate PDs would help you there as well.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. That covers it.
Great. So we'll just kind of take this. There's a couple more questions left. I know we only have a few minutes left, but how important is it that the person who's writing a recommendation letter is well known?
No, the person should know the student. But I mean, if I'm in numerical linear algebra, I don't know the big names in topology. I think the person should be able to say something, give genuine information about the students. Whether it's just that the letter writer is starting out as an assistant professor, and it doesn't matter to me. I want valuable information about the student. I don't care about the statue of the letter writer.
Yeah, I agree with that on the committee. It's been very, very rare that I have had a letter writer where I'm like, oh, it's so and so. What did they say? You know, so I wouldn't stress about that at all.
Yeah, in the math bio field, it's a little bit more tight knit, I guess. So if you do have, some rather large name in the field, I think it's probably a higher chance that we're going to know who that is. So it does definitely help and carry some weight to it, but it's definitely not a prerequisite for having a good letter. Somebody that you've done some research with or taken a class with that can really speak to your maturity and interest is definitely going to be more important. Yeah.
I'll just add a data point here. We got a lot of really strong students in our grad program from four-year colleges, and their faculty tend to know them a lot better than, say, the folks at a larger university. And those are some of the most excellent letters that tell you a lot of really useful information about the students, and many of those students, a lot of them just do really, really well. And I don't know how you would judge stature of, a person who's primarily teaching focused. I would say they're in a different category to begin with, but those letters are really, really helpful.
Okay, and how important is the rank of the university for getting jobs in the future?
Well, so Cash on his slides mentioned the AMS rankings. Well, those are rankings, I think, mostly for purely oriented departments and don't really target more applied or interdisciplinary departments. I don't know the ranking of the graduate schools, actually. Where are we? I have no idea.
Are you talking about getting jobs after graduate school? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, the main thing that matters for getting jobs after grad school is the connections that you've made and the connections that your advisor and those in the department that know you very well have made. I can just tell you, like I was talking to my grad student who's graduating this semester just a couple minutes before this, and he's like, all the job, opportunities that I have basically come from networking, and everywhere where I don't have the network, I don't have an offer. So it matters a lot, but not in terms of the ranking, more in terms of the social network, I guess.
I would say that what sort of is independent of the ranking, that is an individual achievement that often is viewed very strongly as the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship. So no matter where you go, if you can get one of those, it's sort of an independent stamp that you're...
Mansoor, that is more for pure math. The applied people have very few of those because they can get these internships from national labs, which pay a lot more.
Oh, sure. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about just, in my case, I did my undergrad in Canada, and then I came to a university in the US, and I figured it seemed to me that, and I was a dual citizen, it seemed to me that this was a prestigious thing to get because I wanted an academic career. And I went out and did everything I could to get it. I started research right away. I developed a really good proposal, and I got it, and I think it made a difference. And so I'm not saying you need one of those. I'm just saying that the question was about an academic research career at a R1 university. So to get there, you need to land a competitive postdoc. And I think that's an individual distinction that is really sort of, you're competing nationally against everyone. So if you really want to aim for that type of career, I would start to look into that sooner rather than later, because you do have I think 2 shots at it, right? One as an undergrad and then maybe 1 time in graduate school. So not necessary, but something to look into.
So I think what we'll do now is we're running out of questions. So I think what we'll do now is thank Dr. Ibsen, Dr. Hayter, Dr. Flores, and Dr. Sullivan for being here. Appreciate you guys so much. And I know you guys have another meeting, I think, to get to here in just a couple minutes. So we'll give you guys at least 3 minutes to grab a soda or something. And the grad students will stay here for maybe another 5 or 10 minutes. If anybody has questions that they don't want to ask in front of, maybe some professors or something. So thank you guys again. I appreciate your time. And if anybody has any questions that you didn't want to ask the professors, feel free to throw those guys in the chat now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
So I did
we can.
a question about fees and like what the student fees are. So I think there's sort of like maybe a misconception about you having to pay fees, but then them also paying you to TA, and what's that about?
Yeah, so I'm pretty well versed in this, just through some of the other things that I do here. So what happens is traditionally you get your tuition covered, so that's kind of not an issue that you have to deal with. And then on top of that, you get some amount of money for teaching graduate courses often, or maybe for doing research, right? At North Carolina State University, we also have graduate student fees, just like undergrad have fees. And it's just a shade under $1,300 a semester for your first probably 4 years here, maybe 3.5 or something. And then it goes down because you eclipse credit hours thing. But yeah, so you're getting paid some amount of money to teach, but then you're also paying student fees, and that has to do with like state funding issues. You can't use state money to pay fees, and like a lot of the money that we get is like state money, so it's kind of weird, and I don't expect anybody to understand how it works because I'm not sure anybody does. But there are schools like UNC recently who don't necessarily have grad students pay fees, so it's a thing to consider when you look at stipends. It's not super important, but like if Nebraska and NYU had the same stipend amount, that might be an issue, right? Like you probably can't live for the same amount of money in Nebraska.
I mean, yeah, you should also, I mean, one way you could think about it is your effective stipend is the stipend they tell you minus your fees, right? So like our fees are like outrageously high. Like I have a friend at Kentucky who like their stipend is like lower. It's only like $1,700 or something, but they pay $60 in fees compared to our $1,300. So that's a massive difference. Like, yeah, we $2,600 total. So for us, so
yeah.
Good, Katie.
There's just another question, and I was going to ask you, but if you have something to add to that, Lindsay, I'll wait.
I was just going to say I take out student loans to pay my fees, and I just don't worry about it. So depending on where you stand on that, that's an option. I'm not going to go into that, but that's a thing.
And so for now, I'm going to stop the recording. So if you have any other questions that you want to ask us,